host the region's top diplomats for the upcoming ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting. But the gathering comes amid two elections that could significantly impact the bloc. Well, Leong Wai Kit looks at what the upcoming Washington elections and likely polls by the Myanmar army could mean for Southeast Asia.
The year-end US presidential elections is a likely topic for discussions as ASEAN's top diplomats meet in Laos this week. With incumbent Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race earlier this week, and Republican nominee Donald Trump's chances of winning potentially boosted by an assassination attempt on his life, how ready are Southeast Asian states for a change in US leadership?
We know that Trump will be more transactional. We know Trump will pay a lot of attention to issues like trade surpluses or trade deficits. So on the one hand, you have countries like Singapore that are in a safe zone, right? Because we have a trade deficit with the US. On the other hand, you have countries like Vietnam that would be confronted with a dilemma, right? Because on the one hand, there is a realization that there is strategic value and purpose in improving relationship between the US and Vietnam from both perspectives, right? But on the other hand, Vietnam has a fairly large trade surplus with the US.
When Trump was in office, issues such as the trade war with China surfaced. Under Biden, the strategy was a path of alliances to balance what the US called a more assertive China.
I think the Chinese are at the point where they have concluded it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. They are resigned to the fact that there is certainly, a structural dynamic here that is at play regardless of who runs the White House.
Prof. Liao adds even if Trump returns to the White House, there'll be structured checks and balances.
If Trump comes in, his position will be that he will be able to solve everything. Yeah, so it doesn't matter. It could be Ukraine, it could be cross-strait relations, it could be Gaza, it could be Myanmar, South China Sea. He'll solve it, so we don't have to worry. Yeah. So, nevertheless, I think that for Trump, the priority of that relationship with China is still going to be very important.
Closer to home, potential elections in Myanmar could spell more uncertainties. Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing has vowed to hold polls next year. But that raises many questions. Can elections be held amid ongoing violence? Will the polls be fair? How will that shape the Myanmar crisis?
I would say election is not a goal. Election is a process. The goal is something else, right? You could say the goal is the legitimization of the next government that's heavily controlled by the military, or the goal is that the military wants to shift into the next stage of the politics.
What is worthy to discuss, what is worthy to consider is the political atmosphere beyond the elections. So election will likely create a scenario where the military has to step back. So Senior General Min Aung Hlaing has to consider whether he wants to be president or he remain the commander-in-chief. This is not something easy for him to decide. Because once he leaves the military, and the next commander-in-chief will have his own mind. This is something he cannot guarantee.
This is a likely scenario, meaning if the military were to hold elections, it is widely expected that they would win it. As of now, I'm told that ASEAN has not actively discussed this scenario, meaning there are no unified positions or guidelines on how the bloc should interact with a post-election Myanmar. But questions that might be raised include whether or not the Myanmar military, which is accused of war crimes and killing civilians, should be recognized and legitimized if they win the elections. And how relevant would the peace plan, known as the 5-point consensus, be after the polls? Of course, these are questions for the future. I'm told that right now the bloc is focused on the present when it comes to the Myanmar crisis. Now, this week, when the ASEAN ministers gather in Vientiane for the ASEAN ministers meetings, their plates will be full, especially when there are already ongoing crises such as the Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Hamas, and tensions on the South China Sea. Now, as with all ASEAN meetings, the bloc will want to emphasize on several key messages: the importance of peace, rule of law, and bloc unity as it navigates these thorny issues. Leong Wai Kit, CNA, Vientiane.